Thanks for coming. This is great. I love having to put out more chairs. That's just awesome. It's good to see you all here. I know that when you saw that we were having surf day at Dakota Wesleyan, you thought that there was a beach involved somehow. And especially this time of year when we're all longing for warmer weather and for a chance to catch some rays at the beach, you thought, surf day, awesome. But here we are. SURF stands for Sanford Underground Research Facility. Some of the most interesting, exciting scientific research being done in the United States. Who would have thought? South Dakota. So we're going to have a talk today from NICOL REINER, who is so NICOL REINER has 28 years of experience as an educator in K-12 classrooms at the university level and at the state level as part of the South Dakota Department of Education. And she's currently the Director of Education and Outreach for SURF. In her career, NICOL has led several initiatives with a focus on building educator leadership capacity through professional development and creating equitable access to rigorous and relevant learning experiences for each and every student. Thank you, NICOL, for being here, and come talk to us about a mile underground.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to engage in a little bit of storytelling today, which is kind of fun. As a teacher, I've always enjoyed storytelling. I taught mathematics, actually, for a really long time. And sometimes telling stories in mathematics is challenging, but it's what gets the smiles in a mathematics classroom. But I have shifted to science and STEM, and so I'm going to tell you some stories today about the Sanford Underground Research Facility, which is my new favorite place for sure. So I'm part of a team. I have a team member here, actually I have a couple team members here. Ashley Armstrong is part of the Education and Outreach team, and Deb Wolf, who is our Director of Outreach and Culture. And we have some team members who aren't here either, so I want you to know that all the great things that we do because we're part of an amazing team. It's really hard to do the complex work that we do alone. It's impossible, actually, to do it alone. So we do it together. And so my teammates that are out in the field and out in classrooms across the state are pictured here on the screen. So they include Kristen Riley, who's actually our administrative assistant. She mostly stays in Leeds, South Dakota, and basically holds us all together as we go out across the state. Ashley's here. Julie Dahl is also a science education specialist, and her experience was as a teacher teaching K-8, so she has a lot of the elementary experience when we're working with elementary teachers and students. And Chad Ronish, who taught secondary science like Ashley did as well. So, what is SURF? How many of you heard of Sanford Underground Research Facility before today? Not a whole lot of hands. Okay, this is good. So you're going to learn a lot today. This is great. So Sanford Underground Research Facility, which we lovingly call SURF, because the other is a mouthful of words, is in Leeds, South Dakota. How many of you have been to Leeds, South Dakota? More hands for that. How many of you have seen the open cut? Because that's such an interesting and noticeable geological feature. Okay, so I think it's in one of these pictures. It is, just barely in that top middle picture. You can see a piece of the open cut. And that is where mining started more than 125 years ago, actually closer to 145 years ago in Leeds, South Dakota, in a place called Homestake Gold Mine. And where we are at SURF was a gold mine for 125 years. And they've gone very deep into the earth, and they created a kind of a system of most people would call it tunnels, we call it drifts. I'll show you a picture in a moment. And then when they couldn't be a gold mine anymore, because it wasn't profitable to mine gold at the time, there were scientists that said, hey, you've got some cool space underground, and we'd really like to get our hands on it. And so the talks started at that point, saying, you know, what could we do with this underground space? So a couple other things up there I'll point out before I move to the next slide, but on the top right, you can see a picture of our wastewater treatment plant. So there are many, many things, which I'm going to talk about, many stories of SURF, many people who make the stories of SURF possible. And one of those is one of the stories is the wastewater treatment plant, which which is very important to us because we are constantly pumping water up from underground. And when we're pumping water up from underground, we want to make sure that when it's released into the environment, it is clean and fresh and good for the animals and the plants and all of the things that it will encounter. And our wastewater treatment plant and crew make sure that that happens every single day. Our facility has things that we do above ground, like I was just talking about the wastewater treatment plant, but it also has things underground. So you can see some of the science spaces that are underground, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. And in the top left, you can see actually two things. You can see the hoist, which I'll show you in a minute, and then the town of Lead itself. A lot of cool things going on there. A couple other pieces of data, just for fun. We have 223 acres on the surface that makes up Sanford Underground Research Facility, but we have 7,700 acres underground. 223 on the surface, 7,700 underground, which speaks to the amount of space that we have underground. Okay, let's keep going. I do want to talk a little bit about the vision and mission of SURF because as an educator, the vision is very important to me, or the mission, well actually both of them are, but the mission has two parts. The first part being we advance world-class science, and the second part being, and we inspire learning across generations. So we're not only working to advance science and science research, but we want to share it with everyone. We want to inspire learners to make sure that we continue to have folks who are interested in doing this kind of research and supporting this kind of research. All right, so we have almost 30 experiments going on at any one time at SURF. And so we have experiments that are in biology. They have done some really cool study with extremophiles, and there's interesting stuff that is underground, that grows or lives underground rather. We also have geothermal experiments because there was an experiment, which I won't talk about much today, but called Sigma V, that was testing to see what kind of heat they could extract from the earth, or from the water that is in the rock that is quite warm actually. And to think about how could we harness the energy that's in there and then very efficiently use that. We have a lot of experiments in physics. Many of our experiments are in physics, and I'll talk about a couple of really big ones in a little bit. And we have some incredible engineering that's happening in order to make all of this possible. If you think about creating an experiment and going a mile underground to do it, the engineering that's required is quite extensive. And so that's another place where we're doing a lot of work. I think the one I forgot is geology. In order to work in rock and understand how to dig big caverns, you also have to have a very clear understanding of the geography of the area, the geology of the area actually, and the rock that you're working in. All right, so why? Why would we do this? Well, we don't know. I'm going to talk about a couple different experiments, but we don't quite know exactly what will come about from the research and the things that we're finding. An example I will give actually is the man who discovered the first particle accelerator is actually from Canton, South Dakota. His name was Ernest Lawrence. He's actually one of the people that Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is named after. But he came from Canton, South Dakota. And he didn't know when he was developing this first particle accelerator, which was only about the size of my hand, what would happen with that. And now it's used in medical devices. There are huge ones over in Europe, actually also outside of Chicago, that are used to do other experiments. But he had no idea at the time. So what are some things that we could influence? Well, we can influence quantum, some computing and thinking about quantum computing, the exchange of information. We already know that the neutrino experiments that we're doing have impacts for how we understand security and non-proliferation for nuclear weapons. And there are lots of other things. So we don't exactly know where it's going to go, but we're excited to find out where. Now, I'm going to jump into what our facility looks like. If at any point you have questions, so this is the teacher in me, right? Just flag me down or holler it out, because I want you to ask questions too. I want to encourage you to be curious. right? These are the things that help us to learn more. So I want to encourage you to be curious. So this, if you could, how many of you have seen an ant farm before? Oh, more hands on the ant farm. This is good. All right. So this is like if you took the earth and you cut it with a knife and opened it up and look inside like you would an ant farm. This is a model of what the drifts, which are tunnels, right? We call them drifts. What the drifts and shafts would look like in the underground. So there's a lot of them, all right? So you can see a line here. This is the 4850 level, almost a mile underground, and that is actually where most of the science happens underground. During the mining days, they were actually way down here at the 8,000 foot level. But because the water comes in and they shut the pumps off when the gold mine stopped, it's actually underwater about to the 6,000 foot level. So we don't actually go as far down as the 8,000 foot level. So I want you to have a conversation with a partner for a moment before I tell you more about this. I want you to look at this image. I want you to think about, all right, that goes down to 8,000 feet. There's a lot of black lines up there. How many miles of tunnel, of drifts, how many miles of drifts do you think are underground? 7,700 acres, remember, underground. Talk to a neighbor. Make a guess. How many miles of drifts do you think are underground? Are you pointing at things? Thank you, though. But it doesn't. It's not working. All right, so now I want to solicit some guesses. I want some numbers. What do we think? What's too high? What's a number that's too high? 1,000, okay. What's the number that's too low? 1. Okay, great. Now you got some constraints. I will tell you, yes, 1,000 is too high, and I will tell you 1 is too low. What are some, I think, about right guesses? 700? Someone else said one, I missed it. I'm not going to let you go with one guess. We need more. 200? 700? I need more. Take a risk. You can't get it, well, you can get it wrong, but I'm not grading this, so 500? 400? Okay. So there's actually 370 miles of tunnel, of drifts underground. I want you to think about this. So I live in Deadwood. My parents live in Sioux Falls. Before I came here, I drove from Deadwood to Sioux Falls. That is approximately 370 miles. It takes me approximately 5.5 hours. Going 80 miles an hour. So when you think about, wow, if we could drive a car down there, which you couldn't, at 80 miles an hour, which would be disastrous, for 5.5 hours, we might be able to see every tunnel that's down there. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? And it's all underground, right? So a couple of the colors up there, the green lines actually show we have a very intentional ventilation system down there. If you're underground, a mile underground, you can walk around and breathe just like we do up here. Not any issues with the air. Where the caverns are being excavated, they do actually wear respirators, thank you. My colleague's feeding me words here. They wear respirators because they have so much dust and silica where they're actually doing active excavation. And I will say we're doing active excavation because we have a big project, science project come up where we need more space, but we do not do any mining whatsoever. There is no extraction of minerals at all from this place. But the green represents where we pull air in. And the yellow represents places where we pull air out. So there's always a constant flow. And the weirdest thing, underground, when you're walking through the tunnels, you can't go down there. You have to have a purpose for work to go down there. But if you're down there for work, it's actually windy because the ventilation is so intentional and so strong to keep everything well done. It's windy. So you see some pictures. I already talked about the kinds of science we're doing. One more thing that I want to mention, and that is, because it makes me think of windy, When you want to have an emergency system, so you've got 370 miles, and actually we only occupy about 12 miles of that space right now, but 370 miles of tunnel, and there's emergency. How do you get everybody to know? You can call them up on their cell phone? The reception's pretty terrible most places down underground. So they have a really unique system with the ventilation. So you take something that smells really bad, like what they put in natural gas, and you dump it in the air inflow for air, and then everyone underground knows that if you smell something that really stinks, you got to make it to the cage to get out. So you're very creative about how they use the systems that are possible for them to make sure that they can run a very safe operation. And that has been used for a long time, but we can't, let's try this again. We can't do it any better. All right, so, yes, question back there. How would you get an alarm? So if you have 370 miles, it'd be like stringing electric cable from Sioux Falls to Deadwood that's all connected and could all be set off at the exact same time. And the spaces are really hard to get to, and they're stacked on top of each other. I'm not saying it can't be done. It would be super expensive, and we have a method that works just as well. The scent, the stink, can get actually to all of the places that we are working in the underground within 15 minutes, which is important. That time is important because for an emergency, we have to be able to get everyone out of the underground within an hour. So that works within 15 minutes. Could we do it? Yes, but it would be really expensive to do it the other way. So I want you to have another conversation with a partner or a person close to you. Why do you think we go underground? Because seriously, if you wanted to build really complicated science experiments, it'd be way easier to build them on the surface than to build them a mile underground. So talk to a partner or a person close to you. Why do you think we go underground? All right. So I'd love, again, to solicit a couple of ideas of why you think we go underground. Say that again. To block cosmic rays. Who wants to add to that? Yes. It's a controlled environment. Who wants to add to that? Why not? What do you think a kindergartner or a third grader might say about why we go underground? Be secretive. To be secretive. That is the #1 answer. That is exactly it. They're all like, there's super secret government down there. Nope, doesn't exist down there. The first answer was the one that we aim for all the time. The second one is also there. We're blocking cosmic rays from the sun, and it is very controlled down there. And so we know what we're doing. So I actually didn't show my animation. I could show my animation. Maybe. There we go. So if you held your hand out, everybody hold their hand out. You have a cosmic ray going through your hand every second. Can't feel them, they go right through you from the sun or from sources. If we go underground, and you'll start to see this now, right? They're going down to the 4850 level. You don't see the cosmic rays that are in animation there. Uh-oh. It's really dark down there. You don't see that. So the rock acts as this amazing shield for cosmic rays. So if you are underground, it is 10 million times quieter cosmically than it is on the surface, which means you could hold your hand out underground and it wouldn't have a cosmic ray that went through it. You would have a cosmic ray that goes through it, but once every about 3 months. So we're getting them every second on the surface. And underground, we're only hitting one about once every 3 months. Now, if you're trying to build super sensitive detectors, that's really, really important, because on the surface, the noise, the cosmic noise is too much. You can't look for crazy, quiet, sensitive things. It's kind of like if you went to the Super Bowl and you're sitting in the stadium in the Super Bowl, and you saw your friend down at the end of the line and you wanted to say, hey, what are the chances when the goal is scored, right? The football goes into the end zone, and you want to say, hey, what are the chances your friend is going to hear you? Not very good, right? There's just too much noise. Same thing cosmically, which is why we go underground. Okay, so this is Mark Carhart, and he is one of our PhD candidate, actually he's almost there, scientists and researchers, and he talks a little bit about what it's like going underground. And so I think it's a couple minutes, but I'm gonna let him talk about it, because you'll see some things and hear some things from someone who's underground pretty much on a day, well, weekly for sure, but several days a week. So let me give him a little space to talk
The
here.
Drift by Stanford Lab, where our researchers answer your giant science questions in bite-sized videos. Submit your questions via direct message on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Hi, I'm Mark Carhart, and this is the Daily Drift. Today's question is, what is it like to work underground? Well, that's a fantastic question. The answer is really going to depend on what part of the underground you're in. There's something like 370 miles of tunnel underground at Stanford Lab. It ranges all the way from 300 feet beneath the surface to about 5,000 feet deep. So there's a lot of difference between these areas. We only use about 10 or 12 miles of all that space for science, and that's what's routinely occupied. But even in that 10 or 12 miles, there's actually a lot of variance. So there are some areas that are just like you would expect underground to be. They're dark and they're wet. There's water coming down from the ceiling or down the walls. There are areas where a thin film of slime has built up on stuff, and the biologists are really excited to get their hands on that stuff. Other areas, though, are very clean, and actually to step into them, you wouldn't think that you were underground at all. Those areas are specifically the Davis and the Ross campuses at the 4850, which is the level 4,850 feet beneath the surface. Those areas have polished floors, they have clean walls, and they're really well lit. We have running electricity, running water, flushable toilets. We have fridges and microwaves and coffee makers. We have super fast internet and Wi-Fi in just about all the lab spaces. It's pretty easy to feel pampered underground, actually. The only difference really between being there and in an office building is that there are no windows in the lab, which is all right, because all you'd be looking at is a bunch of rock. One of the real differences, though, is the fact that to get there, you have to take a 12.5-minute ride down on what we call the cage. That's what we call the elevator that takes us down underground. And if you forget something when you're underground, you forgot something in your car, forgot something in the office on the surface, you have to wait for a cage to become available and then get a 12.5-minute ride up and then a 12.5-minute ride down. So it's not as easy to just pop out and grab stuff. And that also goes for parts. You can't just pop down to the hardware store and grab something. There's a whole process involved for getting up to the surface and getting material and getting that material underground. But other than that, it's most of the areas underground that are actively occupied by researchers and scientists are pretty swanky. They're pretty nice. So working underground doesn't feel a lot different from working on the surface in most places. All right. Well, thank you for joining us in the Daily Drift. Please keep your questions coming to us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
All right, anyone notice in there, remember here, how long does it take to ride in what we call the cage, which is our elevator, all the way to the underground? 12.5 minutes, yeah, 12.5 minutes. So we go into elementary classrooms and we're like, okay, kids go out for recess sometimes for about 15 minutes. Basically, you stand in a cage, which I'll show you a picture of it in a moment, but it's about the size of 6 feet by 12 feet. So this is about 6 feet, not quite back there, 12 feet. This is a little wider than 6 feet, but how many people, talk to your neighbor, this is the teacher in me, right? Talk to your neighbor. How many people do you think is the maximum capacity that's allowed in order to get to a cage to go to work underground in the morning. Talk to your neighbor, what do you think? For reference, there's 62 people in here, so thinking about 62 people, 6 by 12. All right, here's my math teacher. What's too low? 1. Yeah, I always, at least you're not saying 0. Like, what's too high? 50. Okay, that's a good range. What's just right? 25, 30, 20, 18? Okay, so it's actually, the maximum capacity is 36. So take a little more than half of this room and make them stand in a 6 by 12 space. Put you all in PPE. Got to have your hat, your light, your lunch, because you can't go back up for anything. You're down there all day long. Your coveralls, your boots, any equipment you need for work. 36 of you. And how long are you going to stand like that? A whole recess. Yep. Yes. So that's an excellent math problem, actually. We ask kids about that. Sorry, I see math in everything. But here's the deal, right? I have to be able to get them up. I have to be able to get them up in an hour. It takes 12 minutes to go one direction, and 36 people fit in a one cage. So somebody did the math to figure out, I won't make you do it today. Somebody did the math, figure out that 144 people right now is the maximum number we could have underground in order to get them all up within an hour to meet safety standards. So 144 folks is the max. We don't typically have 144 every day, but we do have people underground 24/7. There's a crew that works excavation for the 12-hour shift in the day and a crew that works excavation for the 12-hour shift at night. And that was true during the days of mining as well, which we don't do anymore, but they sent 1,000 men down overnight and 1,000 men during the day. It was really insane. Oh, and speaking of that, so in the last days of the mine, 8,000 feet deep, okay? So you're down there for 12 hours. You're in all your equipment. At 8,000 feet deep, how warm do you think it is? Really warm. So I want you to do something for me. I'm going to put this down for a minute. Do this. And squeeze them together really tight. So squeeze your hands together really tight. What do you feel? Pressure. What else? Pressure is the only thing you feel? Heat. Heat. So pressure and heat. So we have 1,000, almost 5,000 feet of rock, 8,000 at the 8,000 feet level, right? 8,000 feet of rock pushing down, pushing down, pushing down, lots of pressure. So the rock temperature, actually at the 4850 level, the rock temperature is about 98 degrees. At the 8,000 foot level, it's about 135. Okay, so you're down there in all your equipment for 12 hours doing hard labor. If the rock's 135 degrees, the air is pretty darn warm, and it's 100% humidity. Does that sound fun? Yeah, I don't think it sounds fun either. It's better in our spaces where we do science because we have the ventilation system. So we don't air condition the area necessarily, but we're controlling the airflow, which helps it to be cooler, for sure. Okay, so I want you to do one more thing with your hands. Do this. Hey, what do you notice? Friction. What else? Heat. Okay. We're going to remember that because I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So these two beautiful structures are called the Nordberg double drum hoists. And they are the hoists that hold a mile of rope that puts the cage underground and then back up to the top again. And our cage system is actually a counterbalance. So there's two of them. and it's not really two, one's a work deck, but there's one that goes down to the bottom, and when that one's at the bottom, the other one's at the top, and then when that one's at the top and they go back, they switch, right? Which would help with the amount of effort it would take to get things going. But you might notice on the double drums, that there's a groove for every single foot of rope. What would that help with? Think back to what I just made you do. Friction, yeah, right? So if the rope always has its own spot, it doesn't rub on other rope. And so without friction and without creating that heat, you save your rope. Because if you have a damaged rope that's a mile long, that weighs 27,000 pounds, and you're like, this one's broken, we need a new one. How easy is that? Not. It's not easy. So these have been specifically designed. Now, talk to your partner. I would like you to have a conversation about what year, these are the actual drums we used in the Yates hoist room that works with our cage. Talk to your partner about what year you think they were installed. Go ahead. Okay, what's too early? 1850, okay? 0. What's too late? 2022, 2000, okay. What's about right? 2010? 1974. That was the year the first woman went underground, by the way. 1930. Actually, it's 1939. These were installed in 1939, and we still use them today. They're very well maintained, and they are the best mechanism we have right now to do the hard work of getting that cage, or the cages, underground every day. And so 1939, pretty impressive. This is, we do give, you can get a tour of the hoist room, by the way. Can't go underground, but you can get a tour of the hoist room, and they're amazing. I had a group of pre-service educators from Black Hills State University there last week, and first we did the slides like this, and then we actually took them to see them, and I said, what's the difference? And they're like, there's no comparison. Like, seeing them is amazing. They're really quiet. They're really, really quiet. But you can get a tour. But my favorite part about it is, this is technology that was cutting edge in 1939, and it is still serving us in a way that's helping us discover things that could maybe be cutting edge in 2100, honestly, right? We're still discovering things. We're building things that will run for years to try and discover things. Pretty amazing. Okay, so here's a picture of the cage. It's a little bit hard to see. This is how we get into and out of the underground. Remember I said it was what, 6 by 12 by 9? So that is how we get underground, right there. It's the only way underground, and there are 2 of them. There's the Yates and the Ross. You have to have 2, right? Because if one goes down, you have to have another egress. You can't just say, we know you're a mile underground, we should be able to get it fixed in about a week. It doesn't work that way. So we have 2. So we actually asked our comms team to, height-wise too, 9 foot tall. So 6 by 12 is the footprint, it's 9 foot tall. And every piece of equipment and every person has to go down via this route. There's no way to get equipment in otherwise. 6 by 12 by 9, okay. Keep that in mind. So we also had our communications team hook a camera to the bottom of the cage so you could see what it looked like. We'll see how well this shows. Pretty amazing, huh? And scary, a little scary. 12 minutes, we'll just wait. I'm kidding. Okay, let me talk about a couple of the experiments. The Lux Zeppelin, the LZ experiment. So I told you we have about 30. There's actually, I think, exactly 29 right now. I'm gonna talk about 2. This one is the Lux Zeppelin experiment. It lives in Leeds, South Dakota, mile underground. It is the world's most sensitive dark matter detector. We proved that and announced it almost a year ago. So pretty amazing to be in South Dakota and have the world's most sensitive dark matter detector. Now, this is actually the inside of the detector. Inside of that inner capsule there is liquid nitrogen. And then it's inside of another tank that has purified water, and it has then another shielding tank around the outside of it. So it's much bigger than that. And you can see the person, right? So you can see how big that is. Guess what the constraints are, right? So that has to be built on the surface and then very carefully brought underground. But what does it have to fit in? The cage, 6 by 12 by 9. Now that's not, excuse me, it's not completely correct. They actually hung it below the cage, because if you hang it below the cage, you get a couple more inches of space, right? So they hung it below the cage. Millions of dollars dangling from a rope underneath a cage over a hole that is a mile deep, right? Pretty impressive. So it's pretty amazing. And we are on the, so here's the inside too. I want to show you one more picture. So very inside is so this is a tank that's around the inner tank, and these are photomultiplier tubes that are around the outer tank. And the photomultiplier tubes are looking for that very specific interaction that would be dark matter. And then it's filled with purified water, ultra pure water. I forgot my last thought. Doesn't matter. Okay, so we're going to look at another experiment. So before we look at the next one, I want you to know that the surf site, when it was a gold mine, has a long history of science, actually. And this man that you see here, Dr. Ray Davis, I believe he was a chemist, actually. He came to the folks who were running a gold mine, 1,000 men, down and up, 12 hours a day. And are they super concerned about safety? No. What are they concerned about? Speed and money, right? And he said, hey, I'd like to build a tank and fill it with 100,000 gallons of chlorine to see if I can see these particles that we don't really know exist coming from the sun. And somehow he convinced them to say yes in the 1960s. And so he built a detector at the 4850 level in the 1960s, and he detected solar neutrinos with that detector. And it's called the solar neutrino problem because he expected to see a certain amount of neutrinos, and he actually ended up only seeing about 1/3 of what he expected. And eventually they solved that problem. They, meaning a whole collaborative of folks, solved that problem by working together with others and realized that there actually neutrinos have 3 different forms, and they randomly change from different forms, and we don't quite know why that happens. And he could only detect them when they were in one form, which is why he only detected 1/3 of what was expected. And in 2001, he won the Nobel Prize for the work that he did underground in Leeds, South Dakota. South Dakota has a rich history of the things that we've discovered about science, for sure. So we are still looking for neutrinos. How many of you have heard of neutrinos before? Not a lot of hands. More ant farms than neutrinos. This is not surprising, I suppose. So I had not heard of neutrinos before I worked for the Sanford Underground Research Facility, which is not that many years. But basically, neutrinos are one of the fundamental particles. It's the smallest particle we know about. 1,000 trillion pass through your body every second. Lots of them come from the sun. But even bananas make neutrinos. So neutrinos come from all over. So they're produced in stars. They are produced by decay. We can produce them with accelerators, which is what we're going to do in an experiment. And they also come from places like nuclear power plants. We don't know how much their mass is, although we know it's really tiny. And they are super hard to detect. I already told you that they oscillate. There are three kinds, which we call flavors: an electron type, electron flavor, a muon, and a tau. So these are the things we are trying to figure out and know more about with neutrinos. And so we are building one heck of an experiment. And I'm going to show you a little chunk of video about the experiment we're building.
$13.8 billion years ago, the universe started with the Big Bang. Energy transformed into matter and antimatter. But what happened next? According to discoveries made by Albert Einstein and other physicists, the Big Bang must have produced equal amounts of matter and antimatter. Yet the stars and galaxies we see across the universe are all made of matter. What happened? Why did matter win over antimatter? A new experiment aims to find out whether tiny particles called neutrinos might be the reason. Neutrinos are the most abundant matter particles in the universe. Trillions pass through us and everything else in the universe every second. They are produced in huge quantities in our sun and other stars, and in smaller quantities inside our Earth. Even bananas emit neutrinos. Scientists can produce neutrinos and antineutrinos with particle accelerators and study their properties in great detail. The Deep Underground Neutrino Experiment, DUNE, will test whether neutrinos and their antimatter counterparts behave differently. The experiment will be housed in the Long Baseline Neutrino Facility and use a particle accelerator at the Department of Energy's Fermilab. It will create the intense beam of particles that travel 1,300 kilometers through the Earth to the Sanford Underground Research Facility. DUNE scientists will build enormous, super-sensitive particle detectors while advancing state-of-the-art technologies. The detectors, located 1.5 kilometers underground, will catch neutrinos and antineutrinos as they arrive at Sanford Lab. The differences in the particles' behavior during their 4-millisecond trip from Illinois to South Dakota will tell scientists whether neutrinos could be the reason that the universe is made of matter. But DUNE can discover even more. If a star explodes in our Milky Way galaxy, the DUNE detectors will be able to see neutrinos from that explosion here on Earth. That will allow scientists to watch how the supernova leads to the formation of a neutron star, and possibly a black hole. The DUNE detectors can even look for particle tracks from proton decay. Many theoretical models predict protons are unstable, but fortunately for us, the average lifetime of a proton is very long, more than 100,000 billion years. However, a proton could decay at any given moment. If scientists observe it, they'll narrow down their models, moving closer to Einstein's dream of finding a unified theory of matter and energy. From neutrinos to black holes to proton decay, the discoveries made by the International DUNE collaboration will transform our understanding of the universe.
All right, so here's a schematic of what you just saw in that video. So we're working together with Fermilab, that is right outside of Chicago, and they're going to use a huge particle accelerator. Remember, that was invented by a man who lived in South Dakota, grew up in South Dakota, and they're going to aim this beam at South Dakota, at the detectors that are being built a mile underground at Lead, South Dakota, and then try and understand more things about neutrinos. I don't know if you noticed, it said, so they're traveling 800 miles at 4 millionths of a second. It's pretty fast. Yes? Ooh, that's a good question. You're nodding. Do you know the answer?
I do.
Sweet. Saved. Phone a friend.
So The beam that will be produced at Fermilab is of one specific type of the 3 types of neutrinos. It will be coming in a specific direction, and it will be an explicit beam of neutrinos, as opposed to all of the other just random neutrinos that will be coming in all the various directions. That's a gross oversimplification, but that's basically the deal.
Thank you. All right, so time for a conversation with our partner again. So we're trying to build these caverns that are going to hold these detectors. I want you to think about this room, the size of this room. Do you think the caverns that we're building to hold the detectors are smaller than this room, about the same size as this room, or bigger than this room? 3 options, A, B, or C. Have a conversation with your neighbor, see what you think. All right, I'm going to come back to this picture. Actually, now you have to vote. How many think they're smaller than this room? Wait, let me get rid of this. Smaller than this room. About the size of this room. Bigger than this room. That was less fun than I had planned. Okay. Let's take a look at this snippet. There's no talk during this snippet. It just shows scale. And I don't think there's a better way to show scale than this snippet, actually. Notice it's all in meters too, right? Because this is a worldwide, it's international project. More than 30-ish countries working on it. That's a soccer field. And there would be 9 in the footprint. Let's take a peek inside. See the little guy? It's a real person size, right? That is to scale. 7 stories tall. 3 of them. 160 double-decker buses. They'll have all kinds of cryogenic equipment in them because these detectors are going to hold liquid argon. And so we will need a cryogenic system in order to maintain it at the exact temperature that it needs to be. There will also be all kinds of data acquisition or IT equipment in order to take the data of all the things they're detecting and get it to the surface. And not only to the surface, but to all of the other folks then that will be analyzing the data. What's the size of the cage that all this stuff has to go down in? 6 by 12 by 9. Maybe you can hang something underneath, right? How many of you liked Legos when you were younger or still today? We're going to need Lego people because you have to be able to take all of this stuff apart. We're putting a detector together that's 7 stories tall and has a footprint, the overall footprint, of 9 soccer fields through 2 very small holes in the earth that go a mile underground. So that's partly to tell you then, actually, let's see here. It's partly to tell you that we don't need just the research physicists that are working on this. We need all kinds of people. We need people who can think very creatively about how to take things apart and put things together. We need people who can do it. Yes? That's an excellent question. So we're excavating now. The excavation takes about 3 years. It's about 3 years to build as well, and then it will run for about 20 years collecting data. So someone who's working on this project could essentially spend their entire lifetime working on this one project if they wanted to. So you can see a couple pictures underground there. One of them is what the cavern looked like when they were first starting to install the monorail. The monorail is a beam that goes across the top of the cavern because we're going to put all kinds of things together that are really heavy and will get really big. You have to have a system, a crane system down there that will do that. And so you can see I don't know, as I can't think of what I want, the things that they're hooking them to the ceiling with, and then you can see the beam that was installed there. And actually, the next picture then, and these caverns did not exist. This is what the cavern looks like. You can see the beam at the top. It's been wrapped because they're still doing, they detonate TNT down there in order to keep blowing the rock up and then making more space. And so that's what it looks like, 65 foot, full 65 foot across of one cavern. However, they still have, they're probably about only a third of the way down in this picture. So here's a picture, a schematic of what it looks like underground, or what the plan is for underground. So remember I said we have about 12 miles of space. So this is the Davis campus. This is where Ray Davis actually built his original experiment, and that's where we have our clean room that we have now with our dark matter detector and some of our other experiments. And then if you walk about a kilometer, you get to the big excavation, which is at the Ross campus, where we're excavating more than 850,000 ton of rock to make space for these detectors. And we just got money from the state of South Dakota so that we can build this yellow drift here, so that we have a lead on a private funder who's willing to fund 2 more caverns, actually, after in addition to the LBNF dune caverns, because we're out of space. All the space that we have that's usable is gone, and we have experiments begging us. We want more space. So it's pretty cool that there are experiments from across the world who want to be right here in South Dakota. I think I'm going to skip that one. I'm going to go down here. So here's a couple pictures of some of the equipment that's down there, doing the science, building the space that so we can do the science. Do those look small? Nope. All of that has to go through a 6 by 12 by 9 foot space, right? What do you have to do then? Take them apart, put them back together, sling them under a cage. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. Study this picture for a moment. What do you notice? What do you wonder? All right, what are you noticing? Yes, I see some folks who saw it right away. Do you see the person? That bolter is the world's largest rock bolter. It is underground in Leeds, South Dakota, a mile underground. Guess how they got it down there? Yeah. So mechanics, engineers, designers, creative thinkers, creative problem solvers, folks who like to put things together and take things apart, we actually employ way more of those than we do scientists. Doesn't mean that any one is more important than the other, but they cannot do their work without each other. And they have to talk to each other, and they have to plan together, and they have to understand the challenges of each other's work. So this rock bolter that's underground puts 20-foot rock bolts into, it's called ground support, which is weird because it goes up, right? But the ground is above you when you're down there. And so they put 20-foot rock bolts in that hold and secure then the cavern space once it's been excavated. Any questions, burning questions that you have that we should talk about in looking at this picture? Yes? So that's a really good question. How do you get the material out? And that is, so we, along with the cages, we also have a skip system, which is kind of like a really simplified description is it's like a bunch of buckets that you're putting rock into, and then they just run to the surface, and they run back down, and they run to the surface. And then all of the rock that's brought out, we have an agreement with the tribes in our area that will never leave the site. So it goes back into the open cut. We're starting to fill the open cut back up. Did it? Oh, yes. There we go. So what they do is they're excavating, they push it to the bottom of a grate that goes to the skip. The skip takes it to the top, it runs over a conveyor belt, breaks it into really small pieces, and then it puts it back into the open cut. Now, the open cut is approximately a mile long, a half mile wide, 3/4 of a mile deep, okay? Try and think of that in your brain. That's hard, that's big, right? 850,000 ton of rock. It's about 9 soccer fields. What percentage of the open cut do you think will fill? 10%? Any others? One brave soul? It's actually less than 1%. It's just so big. So here's a picture of, I'm going to go through a couple pictures pretty quickly here, but here's one of a piece of equipment taken apart that's slung underneath the cage. You can see it kind of hanging by the rope there. Here's another one as they're getting it put together and hauling it up so that they can lower it very slowly down. Oh, yeah. So if you're going to build a detector that's the size of 9 soccer fields and 7 stories tall, do you want it to be the first time you put it together to see if it works? Probably not. Billions of dollars. So this is the world's largest scale model ever that's being built at CERN, and it is 1/20th the scale of what the actual dune detector will be. So there are people right now who are building this in Europe at CERN so that they can see how it works. So we can't do this by ourselves. Like, we need lots of people to do this. And so we have over, it's actually more than this now, over 1,500 collaborators from 217 institutions in more than 37 nations working on this project together. And what I will say with that too is we need researchers, we need engineers, we need mechanics, we need people who like to put things together, operations folks, we need ventilation folks, we need electricians, we need all different kinds of folks. We need EMTs that are ready on site in case something happens. We need security folks that keep the site secure. We need people, geologists, who understand the earth and how that works. We need finance people who work on accounting and ordering. Can you imagine ordering product for that? Like, I'm in charge of ordering the world's largest bolter for underground. That's a cool job, right? We need teachers who go on and talk about it. We need communications people. We have so many different people that work at our place. Our communications, one of our communications gals, she's in a picture, I don't think we're gonna get there, but she likes to tell stories about science. She's perfect. She's perfect for our institution because we need people who tell stories about science. So with that, I will tell you one more thing. And it's this slide, because I'm on the education team, so I want to tell you a little bit about what we do. Oh, and it's on a timer. I don't know how to turn that off. We need IT people. Okay, so I showed you the team in the very beginning, but we feel like it's really important in order to continue to do this work, we need to talk to students and people across the state, across the nation. I'd like to go worldwide someday, that'd be fun. Ashley, worldwide? Yep, absolutely. So we do presentations and field trips. We created and continue to create curriculum units and resources. We work on career exploration and development, and we do a ton of workshops for teachers. So if you ever know a teacher or know someone who's in the classroom, have them reach out to us. So I'm gonna stop there actually, there's only a couple minutes left, and see if anyone has any burning questions that they didn't get to ask during the session. And maybe I'll just say, thank you, and if you do, you can come up and see me so that you have a little bit of time to get out of here. Thank you so much for listening, engaging, I really appreciate it.